committee. So thanks to the film committee and to the college for getting me here, and particularly to Mary Glazier, with whom I've been working for a couple of years now, and she is really the reason I'm here. And more important, she is a big part of the reason that some of the work that I'm going to be talking about today is going on in Lancaster. So honestly, thank you very much. So it's right, I've got a book out there. I'd like to think that your students are going to hang on to that one, but if they don't, I will not be insulted. You can buy a used one. It is not an academic book. So I am an academic. I am a professor at John Jay College. I do the academic thing. I write journal articles. My previous book, which is called Deterrence and Crime Prevention, Reconsidering the Prospect of Sanction, was so overwhelmingly popular that if you go on Amazon and look at it, it has 3 reviews. 2 of them are from people I know. And one of them says, this looks like a really good book, but it's really expensive, so I'm not going to read it. We're doing better with Don't Shoot, I'm happy to say, but it is absolutely not an academic book. And it is not an academic book because everything that is said in it has been said in much more careful and scholarly and measured and nuanced ways, and other things that I and the community that I'm part of have written, and it was not getting across. And Don't Shoot and the kind of the fashion in which I'm going to be talking for the next 40 minutes or so is an attempt to say a couple of very simple, and I'm going to argue important things in a way that people who are not already immersed in these issues can understand and register, and I'm very much hoping will come away with some of the same sense of outrage that you're going to hear from me over the next little while. So the book is basically a 320-page rant, and it says only 2 things, fundamentally. It says that there are things going on in this country, and I am devoted to and proud of this country, but there are things going on here that are unconscionable, and they are infinitely worse than anybody who has not experienced them firsthand can understand. And I want to talk about that. And the second thing I want to talk about is that we don't have to put up with this anymore, because there are, in fact, things that have been developed that make an enormous, enormous difference. And I will say this again, they are not perfect, they are far from perfect, they don't fix everything. They are works in progress, and they are getting better as the days go by. But as we stand here today, we know enough about how to address these 2 core issues that I'm going to be talking about, such that we don't have to let them continue on as we have been. So that is my entire text for the evening. So I said that it is far worse out there than anybody who isn't living it could know. And I am an academic. This is a university. We talk in terms very often of numbers and rates and careful empirical presentations, and I will do that. But they do not convey what's going on. So I want first to present you with some sketches. I am working in New York City with the commander of the NYPD Housing Police, a woman named Joanne Jaffe. And a couple of years ago, I was at a policing conference with Joanne, and she gave me a binder, and I opened the binder, and it was full of women. No,
Oh.
This isn't funny. And it actually isn't. It was full of boys. and it was full of pictures of young black men. They were screenshots of their Facebook pages. And all of these Facebook pages, and she had page after page after page of these young black men with RIP written across them. And I said to her, yeah, I know. I've been seeing this forever. Yeah, get it. Because if you do this work, and if you are in the neighborhoods that I live and work in and to which I am committed, you walk down the street and you in fact see, written on the sidewalk, written on the street, spray painted on the buildings, young black men's street names and RIP. I can go to nearly any city in the country and go to a neighborhood and drive down it and see, dotting the corners, the street shrines to the dead. One of my very, very good friends from college, her dad is here today, Judy Newhouser, who first brought me to Lancaster years and years and years ago. She's married to another of my best friends, and they have a friend who is a photojournalist, and his current project is traveling America, going to black neighborhoods and documenting the emerging art form that is the street shrine. This is normal. I spent years in Boston, and in Boston there is a street shrine to the brother of Annalisa Perry. So Annalisa Perry's brother was shot and killed on the street. He got his street shrine. The teddy bears, the never forget cards, the bottles of empty liquor, the photographs. 2 years to the day after he was killed, Annalisa Perry, who was at that time a 20-year-old mother, went to perform her remembrances. And while she was kneeling at her brother's street shrine, somebody walked up behind her and put a bullet in the back of her head. Killed her on the spot at the site of her brother's homicide. His homicide was never solved. The guy the community thought killed him was killed within a year. Her homicide has never been solved. Black neighborhoods all across the country are salted with these markers of death. And so I said to my friend at NYPD, Joanna Jaffe, yeah, I get it, I've been seeing this forever. And she said, no, you don't get it. I'm working with these young men, they're alive. They don't think they're gonna make it out the year, and they are putting their own memorial pages together. Normal life in New York City. I work in Newark. I live in Brooklyn, I work in Newark, which means I can get on a couple of different trains and be walking to City Hall inside of an hour. And if you get off the train at Penn Station and walk up Raymond Avenue to turn left on Broad Street to go to City Hall in Newark, New Jersey, you will pass, we call them bodegas, convenience stores. You can pass bodegas and walk in there with a picture of your dead son and walk out with an armful of never forget t-shirts with his picture printed on the front. The death is so common that this is now a normal part of community commerce. I worked in Rochester, New York with Loretta Scott. Loretta was the head of the Parks Department for the city of Rochester, New York. And she was also a black woman, and she was also a grandmother. And Loretta came to me one day, almost unable to speak, and said, I was in my kitchen this weekend, in my Sunday best, preparing to go to the funeral of a neighborhood elder. This was an old man, he had passed. The neighborhood was gathering to remember him. And her 6-year-old granddaughter looked at her in her funeral clothes and said, Grandma, where are you going? And Loretta said, I'm going to Mr. neighbor's funeral. And her 6-year-old granddaughter looked at her and said, "Who killed him?" Not what did he die of, who killed him? Because her experience as a young black girl in this neighborhood is that when you die, it's because somebody shot you. I was in Oakland, California while on the Don't Shoot book tour. And I was on a panel like this with a homicide inspector for the Oakland Police Department. And he had recently attended a shooting between 2 vehicles in Oakland. And shots were fired from one vehicle into the other. The driver of the target vehicle was killed, the passenger was not. And so my friend was sitting with the survivor, a 16-year-old black man, to try to get him to give up the shooter because he knew who it was and he would not say. And detective banged on him for an hour or so, wasn't getting anywhere, and finally just gave up and said to this kid, and he was a kid, "I'm really sorry for your loss, this is awful." And the kid broke down. Stony, don't care, gangbanger sitting in the interview room weeping. And he said to the detective about his dead friend, "At least he lived a full life." The dead man was 21 years old. This is what is going on in neighborhoods all across the country. White folks don't live like this. We all know this. This is a problem that is fantastically concentrated in already troubled, poor, and mostly African American neighborhoods. So let me give you some numbers. The national homicide rate now is down to something close to 4 per 100,000, right? So this is the way criminologists and the FBI track this kind of thing. 4 homicide dead per 100,000 in the population every year. In Rochester, New York, where my colleague John Clofus does research, there is an arc of neighborhoods around downtown that in Rochester they call the Crescent. It has street drug and violence problems on a big city scale. It is the most dangerous area I've ever seen in a small city. And John's research says that if you are an 18 or a 19-year-old black male in the Crescent, your homicide victimization rate every year is 520 per 100,000. And if you do the math, that means that more than 1 in 200 young men that age are murdered every single year. And what we know is that for every fatality, there is on the order of 4 to 8 non-fatal woundings. And just think about what that means. It is fantastically bad. And as I've been talking about this recently, I've been saying, and in the campaign, nobody is talking about it. This is not a political issue. It's not on anybody's radar. And after last night, night before, I guess now, I can't say that anymore because it actually came up. And it was interesting that it did because this was, as we all know, the last presidential debate was a town meeting debate, which meant that ordinary people got to ask the question. And somebody asked about this because people care about this. The federal government has almost given up on this issue. Those of us working on this don't really expect any attention from Congress or mostly the administration anymore. There are some exceptions, but not really that much. At the state level, at the local level, people are desperate about this. And finally, somebody did say something. And the president talked about community action, and candidate Romney talked about single mothers. Neither one of which turns out to be a very direct route to doing something about neighborhoods where there are street shrines to the dead dotting the sidewalks. So let's put this in a national context. We are something more than 10 years out from the 9/11 attacks. And as we all know, we have turned the country inside out since 9/11. We have boots on the ground in 2 Arab nations. We have taken the FBI off street crime and put it on national security. We have entirely new government agencies devoted to protecting us from terrorist threats. That has been a very big conversation in the presidential campaign. And I will still say it because it's basically true. Nobody is paying any attention to this other thing. So here's an interesting fact. And the interesting fact is that the death toll for black males in this country is so extreme that the annual homicide count for black males aged 24 and under is almost exactly equal to the body count for the World Trade Center attacks on 9/11. We lost not quite 3,000 people in the World Trade Center attacks, and we lose not quite 3,000 young black men every single year. About which we do very nearly nothing. This is unconscionable. We take this as normal. We're used to it. I sat in a room full of black community activists at my school at John Jay not too long ago, talking about the kind of actual work that we are doing and can be done about this. And there was a break in that practical conversation, and one of my black colleagues, who is a minister and organizer in the Bay Area, said, "Why isn't anybody doing anything about this? Why isn't it in the headlines? Why isn't this at the top of the congressional agenda?" And one of our colleagues, another, in this case, black woman, said, "We're black. We're supposed to die." Not okay. The other thing, another thing that's not okay, is what we are doing in the name of stopping the violence. Because when I say nobody's doing anything, that's obviously not right. What I really mean there is nobody's very much seeking to do anything extra. But we have been doing something about this for a very long time. And mostly what we have been doing is locking up black men. Anybody know how many people are in prison and jail in this country right now?
Somewhere in the neighborhood of 2 million.
This must be a really good school. Because even in places like this where people study this kind of thing, it's pretty unusual for people to get that anywhere near right. And yes, that's right. The current number is 2.3 million people. There is a debate in my academic world, and every time I say this, these are conversations full of outrageous facts, and somehow this one seems even more outrageous. There is a debate in my academic world about whether that number, not the rate, right, but the number, is a little bit bigger or a little bit smaller than the entire population of the Soviet gulag under Joseph Stalin. Can we just pause to think about this for a second? This modern America of ours, a little bit better or a little bit worse than Stalin? But it's true, 2.3 million people. Anybody know what the count was in 1975? Under 300,000 people. So very few Americans understand this. that in a couple of generations, the incarcerated population has gone up and up and up and up and up and up. It has not tracked with crime. Crime went up, the prison population went up. Crime went down, the prison population went up. We all know that crime's been going down in this country since the early 1990s. Weird blip this year, if you read the papers, aggravated assault seemed to be up a little bit. We'll see if we can figure out what's going on with that. But basically, crime is down to the level of, in many places, the mid-1960s. There has been no peace dividend. The prison population, for most of that time, continued to go up. It seems kind of stable now. The annual reports say up 1%, down 2%. 2.3 million people. And what's nice about this, of course, is that all those folks are middle-class white men. Just wanted to see if you would. They're not. 50% of everybody behind bars in this country is a black man. Anybody know what the black male population, that black male percentage of the country is? No, that's bad enough, right? That's the black population. The black male population is 6.1%. And half of everybody locked up. And to go back to my friend John's seminal insight on this, this isn't evenly distributed either. It's not all black neighborhoods, it's not all minority neighborhoods, it's not even evenly distributed across poor and what we might call violent black neighborhoods. It is fantastically concentrated by place. And it is the place, like the Crescent, where the violence is highest, where you go and you find the street shrines, where people sell drugs on the corner. And in those places, and this, believe it or not, is often literally true, every black man in that neighborhood has a criminal record. So I have a colleague at John Jay who has just written a book called The Plague of Prisons. And in the introduction to this book, which is to try to get people to understand the moment of this thing that we're now calling mass incarceration, he says, in Washington, D.C., the current estimates are that if you are a black man in Washington, D.C., during your lifetime, you will go to prison. Everybody. And even I, doing what I do, was taken aback by this. And I wrote him and I got the references and I went back and I went through the citations, and I'm really happy to say he's wrong. Turns out that in fact every black man statistically in the District of Columbia will go to jail, not necessarily serve a felony present. They will be locked up. You have to do special research to understand this. You can't get this from ordinary criminal justice stats or the FBI, but where people have done the work. So 10 years ago or so in Baltimore, they did this work. And if you were a 20 to 30-year-old black man in Baltimore, at the time they did the research, half of you were under criminal justice supervision. Half of every 20 to 30-year-old black man in Baltimore was in prison, in jail, on parole, or on probation. Half. And that's not, you have a criminal record. You can just imagine how high that goes if that many people are actually in the hands of the court. So I was talking about this a couple of weeks ago in Madison, Wisconsin. And afterward, a woman came up to me and she said, you know that story? And I had told this story about my friend Loretta and her grandchild saying, who killed him? She said, you want to hear what my grandchild just said to me? I have a 6-year-old grandson. And he was talking to me the other day and he said, Grandma, when I grow up and go to prison, she said, I had to think, Do I hit him so hard I knock the taste out of his mouth? Which is a phrase I had never heard before. Or do I choose door number B, which happily is what you took? But the point here is that we have side by side with what we think of as good neighborhoods. Neighborhoods all over the country, where particularly if you are a black male, your rational expectation is that you will be killed and/or, because unhappily these are not mutually exclusive, you will go to prison. And this is so rational. The Bureau of Justice Statistics' current estimate is that if you are a black male born in the country today, you have a 1 in 3 chance during your lifetime of serving a felony prison sentence. 1 in 3. And we should know this is not okay, right? And there is all kinds of formal research to demonstrate that when you have been locked up, you will never get a good job, barring a miracle. You will make less money. You have less reason to invest in your future in all kinds of ways. There's no reason to go back to school. You can't pass a background check. In most states, if you have a felony record, you can't get a state license to cut hair. They won't let you be a barber. And I have personally determined that until this changes, I'm not getting my hair cut. You are less likely to wed. You are less likely to live with the mother of your children and your children. You are less likely to support your children. It goes on and on and on and on and on. If you haven't had a parent incarcerated, the likelihood that you will be expelled from school is 4%. If you have a parent who's been incarcerated, the likelihood that you will be expelled from school is 25%. The ripple effect goes on and on and on and on and on. And remember again, this isn't evenly distributed across the nation. It's particular neighborhoods. And in these particular neighborhoods, everybody's got a record, nobody can work, we won't let people put their lives back together. And that's the formality and the logic and some of the findings. The simple version of this, and a lot of this is really simple. As one of my black friends said, if you want to destroy a civilization, lock it up. And that is correct. There is nothing that a community can do. Economic development, work on education, fix health care, jobs programs, all this stuff. Nothing will work if nobody can get a job and young black men expect as a normal part of their life course that they're going to go to prison. And when candidate Romney said, let's talk about single mothers, not as he might have said, I will point out, let's talk about absent fathers, which seems a little bit more to the point to me. But if we look at things like single parent families and say, why is this going on? One of the reasons is that we are destroying the lives of the men in these neighborhoods. And then we blame them and their partners and their communities for not being able to function. And this too is not okay. I don't want to live in an America where it is the normal expectation of black men in communities all across the country that they will get killed and locked up. This is not all right with me. So, here endeth the lesson of the first part. The violence and the incarceration is inexcusable. Fortunately, I'm going to say we don't have to do this anymore. And I could tell you in the next 30 seconds what you do about it, and nobody would believe me. So this next bit is setting the stage that gets you to the point that it makes sense that what actually works. So this is going to oversimplify things, but not so very much. When we look at this toxic mess that I've been describing, we are basically talking about the interplay of three communities. There is what we usually mean when we say the community, by which we mean the good people in even hard-hit neighborhoods. There are the police, and it's not just the police, it's the law and all the rest of us that pass the laws, and it's the courts and corrections and all that sort of stuff. As a practical matter, day in and day out in these neighborhoods, it's the police. And there is the community of the streets. So there are the guys who drive the violence and sell the drugs, that drive the cops, that get everybody arrested and get everybody locked up. So I want to talk some about those three communities and the way they look at each other. And you can start in any of these places, because what I'm going to say is that those three communities are locked in a disastrous dance with each other that none of them really understand, and it's making it worse for everybody. But let me start with the community. So you can imagine a world in which desperate, poor, scared black communities look at what the police do and say to them, we really appreciate your hard work. We understand that you care about us. We understand that you're in our neighborhood because people are getting killed and you want to stop that. You want to protect us. We understand that you are doing the very best that you can. It's not working and it's not stopping the killing and all of our men are getting locked up. But we know your intentions are good and we thank you for your trouble. That is not what these neighborhoods say. The normal public narrative in the neighborhoods I work in is that they are doing this to us on purpose. And if you don't understand what us means, or in this case what they means, in this case, they means us. People in these neighborhoods think that white America is doing this to them deliberately and with malice aforethought. And the story they tell is they have all the power, they've got all the guns, they've got all the money, they've got the surveillance aircraft that can spot the coca fields in Bolivia and Peru. They could keep this stuff out of our neighborhoods if they wanted to. It's on every corner. The dealers are standing out here in plain sight. They drive right by them. We complain all the time. Nobody ever shuts down the crack house next door. The guns don't come from our neighborhoods. The drugs don't come from our neighborhoods. The money doesn't stay in our neighborhoods. There's just as much dope in the suburbs as there is here. And let me ask you by show of hands, anybody in this room know where to buy dope? Everybody with your hands down is lying. And you know it as well as I do. And they look at that and they say, not only that we could stop it if we wanted to and we don't, and that means that we want it to happen. They live in a place where this did not begin with the crack epidemic. They begin in a place where this began with their forebears being transported by force as slaves to this country at the time of the founding of the nation. And their experience with the cops and with the rest of us is slavery and slave catching and tens of thousands of black soldiers in the Civil War who didn't get anything out of it. And Reconstruction taking the gains of emancipation away, and the black codes basically re-enslaving in legal ways those who were freed. and Jim Crow and the dogs and the fire hoses being put on civil rights marchers and COINTELPRO and J. Edgar Hoover's personal attempt to blackmail Martin Luther King and shut him down, and. The civil rights transformation of this country was 1968. It was not that long ago. I work with people who were in their grandparents' homes when the Klan came in and lynched them. They remember this. They were there. You talk to people about this, and I've heard black police officers say, look at the pictures of the lynching. Everybody has their hands cuffed behind their back. And that's often true. You know what that means. And we do know what that means. The toxic narrative in these neighborhoods is that when the civil rights finally were the law of the land, white America needed another way to do to these neighborhoods and to this people what white America had always done. And drug enforcement especially was what we came up with to do it. And the point of law enforcement is to continue against them race war by other means. And part of the hardest things for me to learn in the decades I've been doing this work, because I heard it literally from the beginning, I walked these neighborhoods. Part of the hardest thing I had to learn was just how plausible that is. If that is your community historical experience, it's not wild-eyed. It's not true, right? I say to people, my angry black friends, if this were true, then ever since about 1970, 15,000 police departments working across both Democratic and Republican administrations and dealing with some extremely serious and dangerous foreign organized criminals would have had to successfully smuggle drugs in, invent crack, get them into the neighborhoods, organize the activities of all these police departments, drive the agenda in Congress, and systematically carry out this subtle and detailed plan to do you damage. And I don't know any white folks that are that competent. I sort of wish I did, because if they were that good, we could turn this thing around pretty fast. So I don't believe it's true for a second. I have come to understand how reasonable it is for the community to believe that it's true. And if you believe that, you don't believe in the law, you won't snitch. People think snitching is about fear. It's not about witness intimidation. It's about being so angry that you won't talk to the police. You won't tell the guy on the corner to put his gun away and not sell drugs on your front lawn. When everybody you know's been arrested, when everybody you know's been stopped on the street, you don't like the cops, you don't like the law, and the community's voice against crime is shut down. And that is disastrous. The police, next community, the police look at that and they've got their own narrative. They don't think they're not talking to us because they're mad at the way we're treating them. They say, everybody's living off drug money. Nobody cares. Everybody's complicit. Nobody teaches their kids to finish school and get a job. And I get them to say to them, maybe if you hadn't given him a felony record, he'd finish school, which doesn't go over that well a lot of the time. They look across the gulf in the other way. And they don't see anger and pain and trauma and different disenfranchisement. They see corruption and complicity and tolerance. And in exactly the same way, if that's the way you think of the communities you police, you will not look to them for help, you will not work with them, you will not respect what they say to you. And both sides look at the corner guys and say, they're sociopaths. They get arrested all the time, they get shot all the time, all their friends are dead, they get locked up over and over again. They keep on doing what they're doing. They use little kids to on drugs, they shoot little girls off their front porch, they're animals. And we have some law enforcement and community people in this room, and they will have had the same experience that I'm about to describe, because this is what happens. You sit down with one of these guys behind closed doors, and they will tell you, I am scared. I keep getting locked up. My friends have all been killed. I've been shot 3 times. I love my mother. She's been trying to keep me off the street, but I need to run with my boys, and I need to run with my boys because I started hanging with them 5 years ago, and I had no idea when I did that I was signing up for a beef with these other guys, and they're trying to kill me. And you want me to put my gun down? I'll be dead in a week. And they're right. We are not protecting them. They need to protect themselves, and terrible things happen. But they're not irrational either. But here's the thing. There aren't that many of them. So if you go to the most dangerous neighborhood and look at the drug dealers and the gang members that drive almost all of this, you will find 5% of the 16 to 25-year-old males in that neighborhood associated with something like 75% of the serious violence. It is fantastically concentrated in a very small number of people. And what you come to see, and you don't get this by reading the literature, you get it by spending time with people in the places and in the way that they live. And when the veneers go away and people stop fronting and really let themselves out, everybody hates it. The cops are frustrated. They don't want to be hated. They know it's not working. They arrest the same people over and over and over and over again. I sat at dinner and there were police officers saying, I arrested his father and now I arrested him. And I told his mother that he was going to get killed. And 9 months later he was dead and there wasn't anything I could do about it. They hate it. The community hates it. The idea that the community likes living in a way that Loretta Scott stood in her kitchen and listened to her granddaughter take lethal violence as a normal part of everyday life. You have to think people are crazy to want to live like that. And people, most of us, are not crazy and they don't want to live like that. They don't want to hate the police, they want help. And this is what I keep telling my cop friends. They want help. They just don't want the kind of help we're giving them. And no young man wants to enter into the prime of his life knowing that he's not likely to make it out the other side. Dead or in a box, one way or the other. Nobody likes this. And in this very important empirical way, hardly anybody is driving the worst of the problem. And I'm just about done here, because it turns out that if you believe the stuff I've said so far, what becomes possible to do is now pretty simple. And it is actually going on here in Lancaster. So part of what your professor and I, much more her than I've sort of been spectating on this, but what she has been doing and what others here have been doing is putting in place in Lancaster exactly what I am about to talk about. So what have we got here? Unconscionable issues, both sides, the violence and the criminal justice response. So we need to do something about the violence and we need a different criminal justice response. Very small numbers of people driving the core action. Once again, 5% of the young men and maybe 10% of them are really out there. So literally you can look at a big city, a big chunk of a big city, and when you winnow it down, it's 20, 30, 40 people really at the heart of things. And nobody likes what's going on most days, not even them. So what you do is you sit down with them. The cops and the community and city service providers get together. You pull these guys into a room. you look them face to face, eye to eye, and you say to them something very, very, very simple. And when we did this the first time nearly 20 years ago in Boston, and it was making front page news on the New York Times, my parents live in Maine, and my mother was tracking this very carefully, and they would go to cocktail parties, and my mother would be asked something every mother likes to be asked, which was, wasn't that your son on the New York Times? And she would say, yes, and it's fascinating what they're doing, and I'll tell you all about it, and it's very complicated, but the first thing you need to understand is he learned it all from me. And when you hear this, you know, basically she's right. This is really simple core stuff. And if we weren't so involved in our ideas about root causes in the criminal justice system and individual accountability and all this stuff that we spend our time thinking about, if we could just kind of unhook ourselves from the habits of mind we've fallen into, you get to see how simple it is. So you find the guys that are driving things, you sit down with them, and they hear three things. They hear people they respect in their own community say to them, we're not the cops, we're not the mayor, we're not the Chamber of Commerce. This has to stop. Because we are your own community, we love you, we care about you, we cannot see you dead, we cannot see you locked up. I've seen ministers say to these guys, you gotta stop going to prison. The church is full of beautiful young women on Sunday morning, and there's nobody for them to marry, which is actually true. There's research showing that the gender imbalance in these neighborhoods that come from homicide and incarceration is fundamentally torquing the most basic social fabric around. We can't have this anymore. Put your guns down. And if you're gonna hustle, hustle quietly. There was a reason I asked you if you guys knew where to buy drugs, which you all do. Because you do know, and hardly anybody in this room worries about getting shot while doing it. The problem isn't the dope, that's a public health problem. The problem with the dope is the guns and the gangs and people standing on your front corner dealing. I go around the corner and do a little deal in the bathroom. I'm not going to say I'm going to approve, but I'm not going to worry about catching a bullet. The community says, we cannot have this, it's got to stop. And I have seen rooms of the most dangerous people we can find in a big city. Listen to a mother talk about what it meant to her and her surviving family to have her son get himself killed, with tears streaming down their faces. At which point the chief of police looked at them and said to himself, as he told me later on, Jesus, maybe they're not sociopaths. It was the beginning of his transformation on this. People will listen to people they respect, and there are many, many sources of respect in the hardest hit neighborhoods. And one of my minister friends says, in a place where the law doesn't hold value anymore, it's more important to say that something's wrong than to say it's illegal, and that's right. So the community says to those who most need to hear it, this is wrong. We're not having this anymore. The social service folks say, we would like to help you. Not in the usual social worker stuff. Not, these guys in uniform, they're thugs, they hate you. We're gonna protect you from them. You are putting your guns down. There is no excuse for it. We're not arguing about that. And we would like to help you. So you want job placement, you want drug treatment, you want emergency assistance, you want housing assistance. We will do everything we can for you. We're not going to promise to fix your life because we can't promise that. But you don't have to have a whole life not to shoot people. And we're going to start there, and then we're going to go on from there. And the cops say, and this is actually what good cops think, They just don't usually say it to the right people at the right time. The cops say, this isn't working for us either. We're not happy, you're not safe, we're tired of chasing you, we're tired of locking you up. Every cop in the country will now say, we can't arrest our way out of this. They've been saying it for 15 years. We want you to take the help. We want you to listen to your people. But this is not a negotiation, and we're not asking. And we are going to respect you enough to tell you today that you are the people who are driving things. We know it. You know it. We are going to give you very special attention from now on, and we are putting you on prior notice today of what the legal consequences will be for you, and maybe for you and your gang, if this is a gang setting, if it doesn't stop. And we have the capacity to dramatically raise the temperature. So if you are a gang member and you walk out of this meeting and your gang is the next gang in town to kill somebody, we will try to solve that homicide, just like we always have. But standing here with me are the DA and the US Attorney and ATF and DEA and FBI, and we will focus on that gang. We will look at everybody in it. You're all committing crimes every day, which is what gang members do. And whether we clear that homicide or not, whether the community will tell us what's going on or not, we know what happened, and 6 weeks from now, everybody in that crew is going to be locked up on drug charges. And if you want that kind of attention, the next time you see one of your boys picking a gun up, don't tell him to put it down. If you don't want that kind of attention, tell him to put it down. It's up to you. What we have seen all over the country when you do this right, we have never gotten less than a 35% reduction in this kind of hot neighborhood homicide. It's often 50, 60, 70%. It is not perfect, it's not. But what we thought 10 years ago, which is there's nothing you can do, it's not true anymore. It's just not true. It is mapped onto drug markets, it's mapped onto robbery. We're doing the first domestic violence version of this right now, and I'm hoping it's working. But the core urban violence stuff is almost off the shelf now. And even more important, it turns out, the cops see the community reading their worst gangbangers, the Riot Act, and they don't think they're corrupt and don't care anymore. The community sees the cops trying to keep their kids alive and out of prison, and they don't think they're race predators anymore. You start to fix these toxic narratives we've got about each other. And at that point, you get this surge in the community where the community starts saying what it's not willing to say right now, which is this is not okay with us and we have to stop. And this is a university, this is what scholars call informal social control, the most important thing we've got going. Formal social control is the cops and the courts and corrections. You're not going to do that because we'll lock you up. You tell criminal justice people that informal social control is actually stronger than the gun and the badge, try to get them to believe this. So I'll do something I do with hardcore narcotics guys. Show of hands, please. Who was really afraid of the police when you were growing up? Yep. Couple. Thank you. Show of hands, please. Who was really afraid of your mother when you were growing up? I'm a deterrence theorist. Deterrence theory tells us that mom today trumps the Fed in 3 years. It's true. And what this stuff does, when you fix these broken relationships, is the mothers and the fathers and the elders and the ordinary people in these neighborhoods who dramatically outnumber the bad guys. They find their voice, they put their foot down, and amazing stuff happens. I'm done. 25 years ago, we started looking for a practical answer to these unconscionable problems. We started with the violence, but the more we steeped ourselves in this, we care as much now about the prison problem, and probably we care more than either about this horrible, broken, racialized relationship between the neighborhoods that need our help the most and those of us who try to help them. Any city that wants to do this work can do it now. You don't need money, you don't need a grant, you don't need a new law, you don't need a DOJ stipend, you don't need overtime. You just need to get it and start doing the work in a different way. And the reason I felt like it was time to write Don't Shoot is because I'm going to argue that all those things are true, that people who desperately need to understand this mostly didn't know that all of this was true. The record is out there. Anybody can look at it. It's pretty persuasive. And I believe that while we try to invent something better, because this stuff is so serious and because these approaches are now available to us, if we know that we can do them, we now need to do them. And part of what is so nice about being here is that Lancaster is a place where it is actually starting to happen. Thank you.
Professor Kennedy does want to take some questions, so shout out your question. There in the back.
I know you said that the rate of